It started with a single whispered rumor. A wife, devoted, elegant, and well-respected in her small, tight-knit community, had done the unthinkable. A clandestine rendezvous at a dimly lit motel, a spark ignited where none should have existed, and an act of betrayal that shook those closest to her. But this was no ordinary affair. This wasn't the story of a woman swept away by passion or a fleeting lapse in judgment. This was something far darker, far more calculated. Behind the closed doors of an idyllic suburban home, resentment had been brewing for years, a slow, simmering anger disguised by polite smiles and carefully curated appearances. And when the truth finally came to light, it wasn't just an affair that was exposed. It was a labyrinth of deception, revenge, and motives so twisted that even those who thought they knew her best were left questioning everything. Was this a woman pushed to the brink by betrayal of her own? Or was she the architect of a cold, calculated plan to destroy the man she once vowed to love? And as the layers of this intricate web were peeled back, one chilling revelation would leave everyone gasping. Someone had been watching the whole time. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking tale, a story of a wife who didn't just cheat, but shattered every boundary of trust, loyalty, and vengeance. Because in this story, nothing is quite as it seems. A dim glow cast by the solitary street lamp illuminated the suburban cul-de-sac, its faint light flickering like the unsteady pulse of a dying heart. The air was heavy with an eerie stillness, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a clock from a nearby house, a sound so faint yet so insistent that it seemed to carry the weight of time itself. This was no ordinary home. Behind its pristine white picket fence and meticulously groomed lawn, secrets had festered, betrayal had brewed, and love, once tender and enduring, had been warped into something darker, something vengeful. It was here, in the heart of this idyllic neighborhood, that a storm erupted, a storm that no one saw coming. On a quiet Thursday evening, the wife, Margaret Hayes, stood in her living room, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of a well-worn armchair. The dim light from a floor lamp cast shadows on her face, revealing the battle raging within her. Her words came slowly at first, barely audible above the ticking clock. Then, like a dam breaking, they spilled out with a force that left the room in stunned silence. "I did it," she said, her voice quivering. "I cheated, but it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because of him." Her husband, Peter, froze mid-motion, the remote control slipping from his hand onto the carpeted floor. Their daughter, Emily, perched on the edge of the couch, turned pale, her eyes darting between her parents, as though trying to comprehend the bombshell that had just been dropped. Margaret's words hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. The confession wasn't a cry for forgiveness. It was an accusation, a challenge, and a reckoning, all rolled into one. For Margaret, this wasn't the beginning of her story, but the climax of months of suspicion, heartbreak, and a desperate need for justice. She had convinced herself that Peter had been unfaithful, and in her mind, her actions were not a betrayal, they were a retaliation. But was her belief grounded in truth, or was it the product of a fractured psyche, warped by fear and insecurity? The neighbors soon heard the commotion. In communities like these, whispers traveled faster than the wind. Margaret's confession sent ripples through the once peaceful cul-de-sac, turning it into a battleground of judgment and speculation. Friends, acquaintances, even casual passersby became amateur detectives, piecing together fragments of gossip to form their own narratives. Yet as each version of the story grew more elaborate, the fundamental questions remained unanswered. Why did Margaret believe Peter had cheated on her? Had he truly broken their vows, or had she been chasing shadows? And most hauntingly, what had driven her to take such drastic, irrevocable action? Margaret's confession marked the start of an unraveling, of their marriage, of their family, and of the carefully constructed facade they had spent decades building. But this was only the beginning. Behind her trembling voice and tear-streaked face lay a secret so shocking that even those closest to her could not have imagined its depths. The truth would not only devastate the Hayes family, but expose a pattern of behavior that challenged everything the community thought they knew about love, loyalty, and revenge. As Margaret stood there, the weight of her admission pressing down on her shoulders, she knew there was no turning back. Her actions had set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. What she didn't yet realize was that the storm she had unleashed would consume far more than just her marriage. It would leave a trail of broken hearts, shattered trust, and unanswered questions in its wake. The camera lingers on Margaret's face, capturing the flicker of regret in her eyes, the faint tremor in her lip. She opens her mouth to speak again, but the words die on her tongue. What more could she say? The damage was done. Her family, her community, even her own conscience, none would ever look at her the same way again. And yet, as the silence stretched on, one thing became clear. Margaret's confession was not the end of this story. It was merely the opening act. In the shadow of Margaret's revelation, we are left with questions that demand answers. Was her revenge a misguided attempt to level the scales, or was it born out of something more sinister? And what about Peter? Was he the faithful husband he claimed to be, or had he played a role in igniting Margaret's fury? As the camera pans away from the haze dimly lit living room, the audience is left on edge, teetering between pity and judgment. This was not just a story of infidelity. It was a story of trust turned to suspicion, love turned to resentment, and the devastating lengths one person might go to when they feel betrayed. The answers lie ahead, but they may not be the ones we expect. As the clock continues its relentless ticking, one thing is certain: the truth is never as simple as it seems. The Hayes household had always stood out, not for its grandeur, but for the energy that seemed to radiate from it. Nestled at the end of Meadowview Lane, it was a modest, two-story home with flower beds that Margaret tended to meticulously. Bright tulips in the spring, chrysanthemums in the fall, her garden was always in bloom, much like the woman herself. Margaret Hayes, a woman in her late 40s with a commanding presence, had a magnetic charm that could light up a room. Known for her bold laugh and quick wit, she was the unofficial social anchor of the neighborhood, often hosting barbecues, holiday parties, and impromptu wine nights that brought the community together. Her husband, Peter, was a stark contrast. A quiet man with a strong work ethic, he preferred to observe life from the sidelines. Where Margaret thrived on attention and connection, Peter seemed content to let her shine while he worked long hours as an accountant, the steady provider of their family. Though his reserved nature earned him respect among his peers, it also made him a mystery to many. To the outside world, the Hayes' marriage appeared enviable, a perfect balance of opposites. But perfection, as the neighbors would soon learn, is often a carefully crafted illusion. For years, Margaret and Peter had been the picture of stability. Their love story, as Margaret often recounted with a hint of theatrical flair, began in their early 20s, a whirlwind romance that had withstood the tests of time. But as with any long marriage, cracks had started to form. What was once playful banter between them now carried an undercurrent of irritation. Late-night conversations turned into curt exchanges, and the warmth in Peter's eyes seemed to fade, replaced by something colder, more distant. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Margaret would glance at her husband during dinner, noticing how he seemed distracted, staring off into the distance as though his thoughts were miles away. Then came the unexplained late-night calls. Margaret would stir from her sleep to hear Peter murmuring in hushed tones downstairs. When questioned, he would brush it off. Work, nothing more, before offering a kiss on the forehead and retreating to bed. But Margaret wasn't convinced. She began to notice other things: the occasional missing receipt, his sudden insistence on keeping his phone locked, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his shirt. Each clue felt like a thread unraveling the fabric of their marriage. And yet she said nothing. For a time, she convinced herself it was paranoia, a product of her insecurities rather than any real betrayal. After all, Peter was the same man who had held her hand through their daughter Emily's illness, who had worked tirelessly to build a future for their family. He couldn't possibly be unfaithful, could he? Margaret's suspicions simmered beneath the surface, but outwardly, she maintained her usual vivacity. The neighborhood saw her as a woman who had it all: confidence, charm, and a seemingly devoted husband. She played the role to perfection, throwing herself into community events and friendships. Yet beneath her carefully curated exterior, Margaret was unraveling. Her once bold laugh now carried a hollow edge, and her late-night journaling sessions became an outlet for the storm of emotions she couldn't share with anyone else. Peter, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the tension brewing in his wife. If he noticed the way her smiles no longer reached her eyes, he didn't say. If he questioned why she had taken up frequent solo trips to the local wine bar, he kept it to himself. Their daughter Emily, now in her early 20s and living at home after college, observed the growing chasm between her parents with quiet unease. She had always admired their partnership, but lately it felt as though they were living parallel lives, their paths rarely crossing. The close-knit community of Meadowview Lane, however, saw none of this. To them, the Hayes family remained a cornerstone of their little world. Margaret was still the life of every gathering, her bold flirting often dismissed as harmless fun. "That's just Margaret," they would say with a laugh when she teased the waiter at the local diner or gave a playful wink to Mr. Thompson next door. And Peter? He was the rock, steady, dependable, and utterly devoted to his family. Or so they thought. But secrets have a way of seeping through even the strongest walls. One evening, during a neighborhood potluck, Margaret's behavior sparked whispers. She had been unusually attentive to one of the new neighbors, a younger man named Greg who had recently moved in. Her laughter rang louder than usual, her hand lingering on his arm during their conversation. Peter watched from across the yard, his expression unreadable. To some, it seemed like harmless fun, a way for Margaret to inject a little excitement into an otherwise mundane evening. But to others, it hinted at something more, a crack in the Hayes' seemingly perfect facade. What the neighbors didn't know was that Margaret's boldness wasn't driven by a need for attention. It was fueled by something darker, the gnawing belief that Peter had betrayed her and the desperate need to reclaim control. If he had strayed, why shouldn't she? If loyalty was no longer sacred, then why should she uphold it? These thoughts consumed her, twisting her once steadfast love for Peter into a toxic brew of anger, sadness, and defiance. Margaret's interactions with Greg were just the beginning. Over time, she began to push the boundaries further. Her once flirtatious nature took on a sharper edge, a deliberate intensity that left no room for doubt about her intentions. She wasn't just seeking validation, she was sending a message to Peter, to herself, to anyone who cared to notice. But as Margaret plunged deeper into this dangerous game, she found herself caught in its snare. What had started as a form of revenge began to morph into something she couldn't control. Her charm, once a source of empowerment, now felt like a mask she couldn't remove. And Peter, ever the enigma, remained silent. He neither confronted her nor confessed to any wrongdoing. His stoic demeanor only fueled Margaret's suspicions, convincing her that his guilt lay in his refusal to acknowledge it. The stakes were growing higher, not just for the Hayes family, but for the entire community. Neighbors who once admired Margaret's vivacious spirit now gossiped behind closed doors. Was she seeking attention, or was there truth to the rumors of infidelity? And what about Peter? Was he the victim of Margaret's insecurities, or was he hiding secrets of his own? The tension within the Hayes household reached a boiling point one fateful evening. Emily, tired of the unspoken hostility between her parents, confronted them during dinner. Her voice trembled with frustration as she demanded answers. "Why are you both pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy fog. Peter looked at Margaret, his gaze steady but unreadable. Margaret, in turn, met his eyes with a defiance that masked the vulnerability beneath. It was as though they were locked in a silent standoff, each daring the other to speak first. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "Maybe we should stop pretending," she said, her voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of anger. "Maybe it's time we talked about why you've been sneaking around, Peter. Late night calls, locked phones, missing receipts. Do you think I haven't noticed?" Peter's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he leaned back in his chair. "And what about you, Margaret?" he countered, his voice low but firm. "Do you think I haven't noticed the way you throw yourself at every man who gives you a second glance? Don't play the victim here." Emily's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she clutched her fork. This was no longer the quiet, unspoken tension she had grown used to. This was something raw, something dangerous, and as the argument escalated, It became clear that the Hayes family was standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong step away from falling into the abyss. But for all the accusations and deflections, the truth remained elusive. Had Peter been unfaithful, or was Margaret's suspicion a projection of her own guilt? Was Margaret's bold flirting a cry for help or a calculated act of revenge? And most importantly, could their marriage survive the storm that was tearing it apart? As the evening wore on, the argument subsided into a heavy silence, each member of the Hayes family retreating to their corners like weary fighters after a brutal round. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and hollow, the echoes of their confrontation lingering in the air. And yet, amidst the chaos, one thing was certain: the Hayes family's story was far from over. The cracks in their marriage had been exposed, but the true depth of the fracture remained to be seen. For Margaret, Peter, and Emily, the days ahead would bring revelations that none of them could have anticipated, forcing them to confront not only each other, but the truths they had been avoiding for far too long. As the camera pans out, the audience is left with a lingering sense of unease. What secrets still lay hidden within the Hayes household? And how far would Margaret go to reclaim the love she had lost, or to exact her revenge? In the quiet of Meadowview Lane, the ticking of a clock carries on, its relentless rhythm a reminder that time waits for no one. Margaret Hayes had always been known for her effervescent personality. Her laugh was infectious, her presence magnetic, and her words, charming yet sharp, often left a lasting impression. But over the past year, her demeanor had begun to shift. What once felt like natural charisma now came across as something more deliberate. Margaret's interactions became the talk of Meadowview Lane, her playful demeanor tinged with a boldness that made some neighbors uneasy. It started innocuously. Margaret's conversations at block parties and neighborhood gatherings took on a flirtatious edge. She lingered in conversations with the younger men in the community, her laughter a little too loud, her gaze a little too intense. Subtle touches, her hand brushing an arm, a tilt of her head when listening, seemed calculated, almost practiced. Mrs. Cartwright, the elderly widow across the street, was the first to voice her concerns. "It's like she's auditioning for a role," she whispered to her friend during a barbecue, watching as Margaret teased the new mail carrier about his uniform. Margaret's gestures, too, became bolder. At the coffee shop where she often spent her mornings, she began to leave exaggerated tips with notes scrawled on napkins. "Thanks for the great service, handsome," signed with a flourish. At community events, she wore dresses that clung to her figure just a little tighter than before, drawing glances and murmurs from neighbors who couldn't decide whether to admire or condemn her. To some, it was harmless fun. To others, it was a red flag waving in plain sight. Her friends were divided. Helen, Margaret's closest confidante, saw the changes as an act of rebellion. "She's reclaiming her power," Helen told others when the whispers grew louder. But others, like Sandra, who lived 3 houses down, weren't so sure. "It feels like she's trying to prove something, maybe to herself, maybe to Peter," Sandra remarked after seeing Margaret openly flirt with Greg, the handsome new bachelor in the neighborhood, during a potluck. Margaret's boldness wasn't limited to social gatherings. At the local gym, she struck up conversations with younger trainers, her compliments veering into territory that left some blushing. At the grocery store, she made a point of chatting with the clerks, her voice dripping with charm as she joked about needing help reaching items on high shelves. Everywhere she went, she left an impression and a trail of speculation. For those who knew Margaret well, her actions seemed out of character. She had always been confident but never reckless, charming but never provocative. What had changed? And more importantly, why? The answer, Margaret claimed, lay with her husband, Peter. To her, his once dependable nature had become suspect. The man who had always been predictable, home by 6:30, dinner at the table, lights out by 10, had started to deviate from his routine. It began subtly. Peter started coming home later than usual, offering vague explanations about work deadlines. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now constantly in his pocket, its screen turned away when he received messages. Margaret's suspicions were ignited one evening when Peter excused himself during dinner to take a call. "It's work," he muttered, his voice barely audible as he stepped onto the porch. Margaret followed, standing just out of sight, straining to catch fragments of the conversation. The words were innocuous, something about spreadsheets and deadlines, but his tone was unfamiliar, softer, almost conspiratorial. The next day, Margaret searched his phone while he showered, her hands trembling as she navigated his messages. Most were mundane, work emails, reminders, a text from Emily about dinner plans, but one thread caught her eye, a single message from an unknown number. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." Margaret's heart raced as she stared at the screen. The rational part of her mind insisted there could be an innocent explanation, but the knot in her stomach told her otherwise. When she confronted Peter later that evening, his reaction only deepened her suspicions. He didn't deny the message outright, nor did he offer a clear explanation. Instead, he deflected. "You're being paranoid," he said, his voice calm but defensive. "I don't know who that is. It's probably spam." But Margaret wasn't convinced. She began keeping a closer eye on him, noting every inconsistency, every unexplained absence. She noticed how he hesitated when she asked about his day, how his answers felt rehearsed, devoid of the warmth they once shared. Her doubts grew louder, drowning out the voice of reason that urged her to trust the man she had loved for over 2 decades. Conflicting narratives began to emerge. Emily, their daughter, dismissed her mother's concerns as overblown. "Dad's always been like this," she argued. "He's just focused on work. You're reading too much into it." But Margaret's closest friends weren't so sure. Helen, ever the loyal confidant, believed Margaret's instincts. "A woman knows," she said firmly. "If you think something's off, it probably is." Margaret's suspicions reached a boiling point when she overheard a neighbor, Mr. Thompson, discussing a sighting of Peter at a nearby cafe during work hours. "He was with a woman," Thompson mentioned casually, sipping his coffee. "Didn't recognize her, but they seemed close." The comment sent Margaret spiraling. She began piecing together every clue, every late night, every unexplained receipt she had found in his jacket pocket. But as the days turned into weeks, Margaret found herself trapped in a maze of doubt. She had no concrete proof, only a collection of fragmented moments that hinted at betrayal. And yet her anger grew, fueled by the belief that Peter's loyalty had wavered. Her flirtatious behavior, once a harmless quirk, became a weapon, a way to reclaim control, to show Peter that two could play his game. The tension between Margaret and Peter continued to escalate, each of them retreating further into their own corners, their interactions charged with unspoken accusations. Margaret's behavior grew riskier, her boldness bordering on reckless. Peter, meanwhile, became more withdrawn, his silence leaving Margaret to fill the void with her darkest fears. But the turning point came when Margaret confronted Peter once more, this time armed with her suspicions and the courage to demand the truth. "Who was she?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger and vulnerability. Peter's reaction was unexpected, his face a mask of confusion and frustration. "There's no one else, Margaret," he said firmly. "You're imagining things." His denial only deepened Margaret's resolve. If he wouldn't admit to his wrongdoing, she would find another way to even the score. But before she could act, a neighbor's revelation would upend everything. Mrs. Cartwright, the same woman who had gossiped about Margaret's boldness, approached her one afternoon with a startling confession. "I saw Peter last week," she began hesitantly. "But he wasn't alone. The woman he was with, she looked familiar." The revelation left Margaret reeling. Who was this woman? And why had Peter been so secretive? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Margaret realized that her suspicions, her anger, and her actions had set in motion a chain of events she could no longer control. The answers Margaret sought were within reach, but they came with a price. The truth, as she was about to discover, would shatter the fragile foundation of trust she had clung to and leave her questioning not just Peter's loyalty, but her own motives. What had truly driven her bold behavior? And how far was she willing to go to uncover the secrets that lay hidden in the shadows of their marriage? The weight of betrayal is a heavy burden, but for Margaret Hayes, it had become unbearable. For months, she had lived in the shadow of doubt, consumed by her suspicions of Peter's infidelity. Each unexplained text message, every late night at the office, chipped away at the foundation of their marriage. Yet it wasn't just Peter's alleged actions that haunted her. It was the silence, the denial, the refusal to address her pain. Margaret felt invisible, her anger and heartbreak dismissed as paranoia. And in that void of neglect, a dangerous thought took root. If Peter had betrayed her, why shouldn't she even the score? The decision didn't come overnight. It was a storm that brewed in her mind, fueled by frustration and a desperate need for validation. Margaret had always been the loyal wife, the doting mother, the dependable neighbor. But now, she was a woman scorned, grappling with the realization that her devotion had gone unnoticed, her sacrifices unappreciated. She wanted to feel desired again, to reclaim a piece of herself that had been lost in the monotony of suburban life and the bitterness of a marriage teetering on the edge. Enter Lucas, a man whose presence was as enigmatic as it was intoxicating. He was a newcomer to the neighborhood, renting the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Lucas exuded a confidence that drew people in, a kind of rugged charm that set him apart from the polished, predictable men of Meadowview Lane. He was in his late 40s, his salt and pepper hair framing a face etched with experience and secrets. No one knew much about him, and that was part of his allure. Their paths first crossed at the local gym. Margaret had been there to distract herself, to channel her restless energy into something productive. But when Lucas offered to spot her during a particularly challenging set, their connection was immediate. His voice was smooth, his compliments genuine without feeling forced. Over the weeks, their conversations grew more personal. He listened to her in a way Peter hadn't in years, his attention unwavering, his words tinged with a subtle flirtation that made her heart race. Margaret told herself it was harmless. She deserved to feel good about herself, didn't she? But as their exchanges became more intimate, the line between innocent banter and something far more dangerous began to blur. One evening, after a particularly charged conversation at the gym, Lucas invited her to join him for coffee. She hesitated, her mind racing with the implications, but in that moment the temptation was too strong to resist. The coffee shop was dimly lit, the air heavy with the aroma of freshly brewed espresso. They talked for hours, their connection deepening with every shared laugh, every lingering glance. Lucas was attentive, empathetic, and disarmingly honest about his own struggles, a failed marriage, a career derailed by circumstances beyond his control. He made Margaret feel seen, understood, and most importantly, desired. It was after their third coffee meeting that Margaret crossed the line. The evening had been charged with an unspoken tension, their words a delicate dance around the growing attraction between them. When Lucas reached across the table to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. Instead, she followed him out into the crisp night air, her heart pounding as he led her to his car. What happened next was a blur of passion and regret, a moment of rebellion that would change everything. Margaret's world came crashing down when Peter discovered her betrayal. She had been careless, leaving a text message from Lucas on her phone. Peter's face, pale and trembling with fury, was a portrait of devastation as he confronted her. "Who is he?" he demanded, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. Margaret had no answer. Her carefully constructed justifications crumbled in the face of his pain. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Peter moved out of their bedroom, his silence more cutting than any words he could have spoken. Their once cozy home became a battleground of icy stares and half-finished conversations. Margaret tried to explain herself, to justify her actions as a response to his neglect and suspected infidelity, but Peter was unmoved. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice heavy with finality. Their daughter, Emily, was caught in the crossfire. At 22, she had always looked up to her parents as a model of stability. Now, that illusion was shattered. Emily oscillated between anger and heartbreak, her relationship with Margaret strained under the weight of betrayal. "How could you do this to Dad?" she demanded one evening, tears streaming down her face. Margaret had no answer that would satisfy her. The community, too, had its verdict. In Meadowview Lane, where everyone knew everyone else's business, news of Margaret's affair spread like wildfire. The whispers began almost immediately, neighbors dissecting every detail of her actions with a mix of judgment and schadenfreude. Some, like Mrs. Cartwright, were quick to condemn her. "She had a perfect life, and she threw it away," she said during a book club meeting. Others, like Helen, came to her defense. "You don't know what she's been through. Helen argued, her loyalty unwavering. But it wasn't just judgment that Margaret faced. There were also moments of unexpected support. Sandra, the same neighbor who had once criticized Margaret's bold behavior, approached her one afternoon with a cup of coffee and a simple message: "We all make mistakes." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Margaret, who had begun to feel like a pariah in her own community. The true turning point came when Margaret discovered that Lucas wasn't who he claimed to be. A casual remark from Helen set off alarm bells. "Did you know Lucas used to live in Chicago?" she asked one evening over wine. Something about the way she said it, half curious, half concerned, prompted Margaret to dig deeper. What she found left her reeling. Lucas had a criminal record, his past marred by allegations of fraud and manipulation. The man who had made her feel safe and valued was in reality a master of deceit. As Margaret grappled with this revelation, Peter made a decision that would send shockwaves through their already fractured lives. Tired of the whispers, the judgment, and the pain, he took matters into his own hands. One evening, he knocked on Lucas's door, his expression a mix of determination and fury. What happened during that confrontation remains a mystery, but the aftermath was impossible to ignore. Lucas left Meadowview Lane the very next day, his departure as sudden and enigmatic as his arrival. As the dust began to settle, Margaret was left to confront the wreckage of her choices. Her marriage, her family, her reputation, everything she had taken for granted was now in ruins. And yet the questions lingered. What had truly driven her to cheat? Was it revenge, a cry for help, or something deeper, an unfulfilled longing she hadn't even realized she had? And then there was Lucas. Who was he, really? What had he wanted from her? And what role had he played in the unraveling of her life? Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that she had been a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. As for Peter, his actions hinted at a darkness that Margaret had never seen before. What had he said to Lucas that made him leave so abruptly? And what was he planning next? The answers to these questions would reveal truths far more shocking than Margaret could have imagined, forcing her to confront not just the consequences of her betrayal, but the secrets that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The quiet cul-de-sac of Meadowview Lane was known for its manicured lawns and neighborly smiles, but beneath the surface lay a web of secrets and lies that only began to unravel after Margaret Hayes' affair came to light. As whispers echoed down the tidy streets, neighbors who had once admired the Hayes family's outward perfection started coming forward with stories that painted a far more complex picture. Mrs. Cartwright, a retired teacher with a penchant for gossip, claimed she had often seen Peter Hayes meeting a younger woman at the local park. It was always around lunchtime, she insisted during an interview. They'd sit on the same bench, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. At first, her account seemed like little more than conjecture, but when another neighbor corroborated her story, it added fuel to the fire of suspicion. Was Peter's supposed infidelity not just a figment of Margaret's imagination after all? Helen, Margaret's closest confidant, had her own revelations. Peter was always charming, she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. But there was something calculated about him. He had this way of making you feel special, but it was never genuine. Helen's words hinted at a side of Peter that few had seen, a man who thrived on control and manipulation. Could this darker persona have driven Margaret into Lucas's arms, or was it merely a convenient excuse for her actions? Then there were the whispers about Lucas himself. Sandra, the Hayes' neighbor from 2 doors down, recalled seeing Lucas and Peter in what she described as a heated argument outside Lucas's rental house months before the affair came to light. It didn't seem like a friendly chat, she said. Peter looked furious, and Lucas just stood there, smirking. The revelation raised an unsettling question. What connection, if any, did the two men share? As investigators dug deeper, they unearthed another piece of evidence that sent shockwaves through the community, a series of anonymous text messages sent to Margaret in the weeks leading up to her affair. The messages hinted at Peter's alleged infidelity, urging Margaret to open her eyes and take back control. The sender's identity remained a mystery, but the text had clearly played a role in fueling Margaret's suspicions and, ultimately, her decision to cheat. Lucas Pearson was no ordinary man. From the moment he arrived in Meadowview Lane, his presence had been shrouded in mystery. His charm was undeniable, his confidence magnetic. But there was something about him that didn't quite add up. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered a trail of deceit that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Lucas had lived in at least 6 different cities over the past decade, each move marked by a suspicious pattern of broken relationships and financial disputes. In Chicago, he had been accused of embezzling funds from a small tech startup where he had worked as a consultant. Though the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, the scandal had left a stain on his reputation. But it wasn't just his professional life that raised red flags. Lucas's personal life was equally tumultuous. Interviews with former acquaintances revealed a man who was both charismatic and deeply manipulative. He had this way of making you feel like you were the center of his world, said one former girlfriend. But once he got what he wanted, he'd disappear without a trace. Even more chilling was the discovery of a restraining order filed against Lucas by a woman in Denver just 2 years earlier. She alleged that he had stalked her after their relationship ended, leaving threatening messages on her voicemail and showing up uninvited at her workplace. The allegations painted a stark contrast to the caring, attentive man Margaret believed she had fallen for. And then there was the connection to Peter. A search of Lucas's financial records revealed that he had once worked for a company indirectly linked to Peter's business dealings. While the exact nature of their association remained unclear, it raised a tantalizing possibility. Was Lucas's relationship with Margaret purely coincidental, or had he sought her out as part of a larger scheme? As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the affair, one thing became clear: no one's story could be trusted. Margaret, Peter, and Lucas each offered their own version of the truth, but their accounts were riddled with contradictions and half-truths. Margaret maintained that she had been a victim, manipulated by Lucas and driven to desperation by Peter's neglect. "I wasn't myself," she confessed during an interview. "I felt like I was drowning, and Lucas threw me a lifeline." But her attempts to portray herself as a passive participant were undermined by the passionate text messages she had sent to Lucas, many of which suggested she had pursued the affair as much as he had. Peter, for his part, vehemently denied any wrongdoing. He dismissed Margaret's accusations of infidelity as baseless and insisted that he had been a devoted husband. "She's trying to justify what she did by painting me as the villain," he argued. But his defensiveness only fueled suspicion. Why had he been seen arguing with Lucas? And why had he remained so tight-lipped about the nature of their dispute? Lucas, meanwhile, offered little in the way of explanation. When questioned by investigators, he claimed that his relationship with Margaret had been entirely consensual and that he had no ulterior motives. "She came to me," he said simply, his expression unreadable. But his refusal to elaborate, coupled with his shady past, left many wondering what he was hiding. The web of lies only grew more tangled when new evidence came to light. A hidden camera, installed by a vigilant neighbor concerned about the strange activity on Meadowview Lane, captured footage of a late-night meeting between Peter and Lucas just days before the affair was exposed. The grainy video showed the two men exchanging what appeared to be an envelope, their conversation too muffled to decipher. What was in the envelope, and how did it fit into the larger puzzle? As the investigation continued, it became clear that the story was far from over. An anonymous letter sent to the local police department hinted at a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone had imagined. The letter, written in blocky, uneven handwriting, accused Peter of orchestrating the affair as part of a twisted revenge plot against Margaret. He wanted her to suffer, the letter claimed, and he knew just how to make it happen. The revelation raised more questions than it answered. Was Peter truly capable of such a calculated act of cruelty? If so, what had driven him to such extremes? And what role had Lucas played in the scheme, willing accomplice or unwitting pawn? As the audience is left to ponder these questions, one thing becomes painfully clear. Trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered and nearly impossible to rebuild. In the end, the story of Margaret, Peter, and Lucas is not just a tale of betrayal, but a haunting reminder of the dark complexities that lie beneath the surface of human relationships. And as the truth continues to unravel, it becomes evident that no one, not even those closest to us, is ever truly what they seem. The Hayes family was once the quintessential image of suburban perfection. Their two-story home stood proudly on the corner of Meadowview Lane, its white picket fence symbolic of the stability and love the family seemed to represent. Inside, laughter often echoed through the halls, a testament to the close-knit bond Peter and Margaret Hayes had worked tirelessly to nurture. But in the aftermath of Margaret's betrayal, that laughter was replaced by a deafening silence, a silence that spoke of pain, confusion, and the slow unraveling of a family once held together by trust. For their children, Emily and Jake, the revelation of their mother's affair was a shattering blow. At just 14 and 17 years old, they were thrust into a reality far beyond their years. Emily, the quieter and more introspective of the two, struggled to make sense of what had happened. "Why would Mom do this?" she confided in her diary, a place where her raw emotions spilled out in shaky handwriting. "I thought we were happy. I thought she loved Dad." Jake, on the other hand, reacted with anger. His once close relationship with his mother became strained as he grappled with feelings of betrayal. "She didn't just hurt Dad," he later said in an interview. "She hurt all of us. She tore our family apart." He avoided Margaret whenever possible, retreating into the sanctuary of his room or spending long hours at the gym, pounding out his frustration on the weight machines. Their innocence was collateral damage in a war they hadn't started, a war waged in whispered arguments behind closed doors and tense, tear-filled family meetings. The children were left to navigate the fallout on their own, their once secure foundation now riddled with cracks. For Margaret, the weight of her actions pressed down like a stone on her chest. She had believed that her affair with Lucas would be a temporary escape, a chance to reclaim a part of herself she felt had been lost in the monotony of marriage. But what she hadn't anticipated was the devastating ripple effect her choices would have on the people she loved most. "I didn't think," she admitted tearfully during a family therapy session. "I was so angry, so hurt, that I let it blind me. I thought I was getting even, but I was just making everything worse." Margaret's days became a blur of regret and self-reflection. She pored over old photo albums, lingering on images of happier times, a family picnic at the lake, Jake's little league games, Emily's ballet recitals. Each photograph was a painful reminder of the life she had jeopardized, the trust she had shattered. But amidst the regret, Margaret also found a spark of resilience. She began journaling, using the pages to process her emotions and confront the deeper issues that had driven her actions. Slowly, she started taking steps to rebuild herself, not as the perfect wife or mother, but as a flawed human being, determined to make amends. If Margaret was consumed by regret, Peter was consumed by heartbreak. The man who had prided himself on his ability to protect and provide for his family now found himself questioning everything. "Was I not enough?" he wondered aloud during a conversation with his best friend, Paul. "Did I miss the signs? How could I have been so blind?" The betrayal cut deep, shaking Peter's sense of identity and self-worth. In the weeks following the revelation, he vacillated between anger and despair. On some days, he was consumed by rage, venting his frustrations through long drives and grueling workouts. On others, he felt the crushing weight of sadness, retreating into himself as he mourned the loss of the life he had known. But as time passed, Peter found an unexpected sense of vindication. As more details about Lucas's shady past came to light, Peter began to see Margaret's affair not just as a betrayal, but as a symptom of a larger problem, a relationship that had been struggling long before Lucas entered the picture. This realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave Peter a sense of clarity and a path forward. He focused his energy on his children, determined to shield them from further harm. He showed up for every soccer game, every school event, doing his best to provide a sense of stability amidst the chaos. And while he wasn't ready to forgive Margaret, he recognized the importance of co-parenting and began working with her to create a new normal for their fractured family. In the small, tight-knit community of Meadowview Lane, the Hayes family's struggles became the subject of endless speculation. The same neighbors who had once admired their seemingly perfect life now exchanged knowing glances and hushed comments. I heard she cheated because he cheated first. One neighbor whispered during a book club meeting, "Can you believe it? After everything he's done for her?" Others were less quick to judge. "People make mistakes," Helen, Margaret's confidant, said. "We don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Maybe she felt trapped, unappreciated." The rumors and judgment took their toll, creating an invisible wall around the Hayes family. Trips to the grocery store became fraught with tension as Margaret endured disapproving stares and whispered remarks. For Peter, the community's reaction was a bitter pill to swallow. While some rallied behind him, others seemed to revel in his misfortune, their schadenfreude a reminder of how quickly public opinion could turn. But amidst the gossip and judgment, there were also moments of unexpected kindness. A neighbor left a casserole on the Hayes' doorstep, accompanied by a note that read, "We're here for you." A teacher offered extra support to Emily, recognizing the toll the situation was taking on her. These small acts of compassion served as a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still room for grace and understanding. At its core, the Hayes family story is one of trust, its fragility, its power, and the devastating consequences of its loss. Margaret's betrayal didn't just break her marriage, it fractured the very foundation upon which her family was built. Peter's anger and heartbreak weren't just reactions to an affair. They were the natural response to having his trust so profoundly violated. But the story is also one of resilience. Despite the pain and the judgment, the Hayes family began the slow, difficult process of healing. Through therapy, reflection, and countless difficult conversations, they started to rebuild, not the life they had before, but something new, something stronger. The community's role in their journey serves as a mirror to society's tendency to judge, to speculate, and to assign blame. But it also highlights the capacity for empathy and forgiveness, even in the face of betrayal. As the Hayes family moves forward, their story serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of human relationships, the way love and anger, trust and betrayal can coexist in the same space. And while the scars of their ordeal may never fully fade, they stand as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of redemption, even in the wake of profound heartbreak. In the tangled web of betrayal, passion, and revenge that ensnared Margaret Hayes, the question that lingered in the minds of everyone watching this drama unfold was not just why, but how deep did it go? What began as a personal scandal had spiraled into a mystery that left no stone unturned, no relationship unexamined, and no motive unquestioned. As each revelation surfaced, the boundaries between victim, perpetrator, and innocent bystander blurred, leaving a trail of questions too compelling to ignore. Speculation began almost immediately after Margaret's confession. For some, the story was straightforward. A wife, disillusioned and resentful, sought solace in the arms of another man. But for others, the pieces didn't add up. Neighbors, internet sleuths, and even casual observers began piecing together their own theories, each more intricate than the last. One theory painted Peter Hayes, the wronged husband, as a master manipulator. What if Peter knew about the affair all along? One online commenter mused. What if he let it happen so he could play the victim and gain sympathy? Maybe this was his plan to control the narrative. This idea gained traction among those who pointed to Peter's seemingly calculated composure in interviews. He's too calm, they argued. No one reacts like that unless they're hiding something. Others shifted their focus to Lucas, the enigmatic lover. His sudden disappearance after the affair came to light, raised eyebrows. Why would he vanish unless he had something to hide? Skeptics asked. Some theorized that Lucas had ulterior motives, suggesting he had targeted Margaret for reasons far more sinister than mere attraction. Maybe he was after money, one neighbor speculated. Or maybe he was using her to get to Peter. And then there were those who believed Margaret herself was the architect of her own downfall. She's not as innocent as she seems, an anonymous letter to the local paper claimed. People don't just cheat out of revenge, they cheat because they want to. This perspective cast Margaret as a calculated manipulator, someone who had used her affair as a way to gain leverage or escape a marriage she no longer wanted. As the theories grew more elaborate, the questions became more provocative. Was Margaret truly acting out of revenge, or was she driven by something deeper, perhaps a lifelong yearning for freedom or validation? Did Lucas approach Margaret by chance, or was he deliberately inserted into her life as part of a larger scheme? Could Peter's own secrets, buried beneath his polished exterior, hold the key to understanding what really happened? And most hauntingly, was this a case of marital discontent spiraling out of control, or was there a darker plot unfolding behind the scenes? These questions weren't just rhetorical, they demanded answers. The way Margaret hesitated during her confession, the cryptic text messages found on Lucas's phone, the anonymous letter sent to the police hinting at a hidden truth. Each element felt like a clue in a puzzle too complex to solve. Just when it seemed the story couldn't take another turn, it did. A piece of evidence surfaced that reframed the entire narrative, a hidden camera recording discovered in Peter's study. The footage, grainy but audible, captured a conversation between Peter and Lucas that no one could have anticipated. "You know what to do," Peter's voice said, cold and calculated. "She needs to feel it. She needs to know what it's like to be betrayed." Lucas's response was muffled, but his agreement was clear. The recording revealed a chilling arrangement. Peter had orchestrated the affair, convincing Lucas to seduce Margaret as part of a twisted plan to exact revenge for her perceived indifference in their marriage. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Suddenly, the narrative shifted yet again. Margaret wasn't just a scorned wife seeking revenge. She was a pawn in a game far more manipulative than anyone had imagined. But the twists didn't end there. As investigators delved deeper into Lucas's background, they uncovered a history of deceit and criminal activity. Lucas had been involved in similar schemes before, targeting vulnerable women in troubled marriages. Whether Peter had known this, or if he'd simply been another victim of Lucas's manipulations, remained unclear. The revelation of Peter's involvement raised as many questions as it answered. Some argued that his actions, while morally reprehensible, were born out of deep pain and desperation. Others saw him as a cold and calculated villain, willing to destroy his wife's life to satisfy his own need for control. For Margaret, the truth was both liberating and devastating. She had been wronged, but her own actions, her decision to cheat, her failure to confront Peter directly, had contributed to the chaos. In interviews, she vacillated between anger and sadness. "He broke my trust long before I ever broke his," she said. "But that doesn't excuse what I did. I should have been stronger." The audience was left to grapple with the complexities of the story. Was Peter's betrayal worse than Margaret's? Was Lucas the true villain, or just a pawn in an even larger scheme? And in a marriage built on years of mutual resentment and unspoken grievances, was there ever a chance for reconciliation, or was this ending inevitable? In the end, the Hayes family story is a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the lengths to which people will go to protect their own version of the truth. It's a story of betrayal, but also one of manipulation, regret, and the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. And as the credits roll, one final question lingers in the minds of viewers. In the game of love and revenge, who truly holds the power and who pays the ultimate price? In the quiet aftermath of Margaret Hayes' story, the weight of everything we've uncovered lingers, demanding reflection. This is not just a tale of infidelity or revenge. It is a story of human frailty, the consequences of silence, and the devastating effects of unchecked emotions. We've peeled back the layers of a seemingly ordinary marriage to reveal the extraordinary tensions beneath. We've seen how Margaret's bold flirtation with Lucas, a choice driven by resentment and pain, set off a chain reaction that unraveled her life. We've examined Peter's calculated betrayal, a shocking twist that recast him from victim to villain in the eyes of many. And we've delved into Lucas's shadowy past, uncovering secrets that make us question whether he too was a victim of manipulation or the ultimate puppet master. As we followed the Hayes family's descent into chaos, we encountered moments of vulnerability and humanity that reminded us how easily trust can crumble. The children, caught in the crossfire, bore the brunt of their parents' decisions. Margaret, once defiant, became reflective, grappling with the consequences of her actions. And Peter, who began as a sympathetic figure, revealed a darker side that left us questioning everything we thought we knew about him. But even now, not all questions have been answered. What was Lucas's true motivation? Did Margaret ever suspect Peter's involvement in orchestrating her affair? And most importantly, was their marriage doomed from the start? Or could things have turned out differently if they'd chosen honesty over deception? These unanswered questions are where you, the audience, come in. What do you think? Was Margaret's affair an act of misplaced revenge, or was she manipulated into a situation beyond her control? Was Peter's calculated plot an act of desperation, or a reflection of something more sinister? And what about Lucas? Was he a willing accomplice, or just another pawn in a much larger game? Share your theories in the comments below. We want to hear from you. Your insights, your speculations, and your perspectives could add another layer to this complex story. The Hayes story is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what can happen when communication breaks down and resentment festers unchecked. It's a reminder that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. And it challenges us to confront the darker truths about ourselves, the grudges we hold, the secrets we keep, and the ways we justify our actions in the name of love or revenge. But if there's one lesson to take away, it's this. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden in layers of deception or conspiracy. Sometimes it's right in front of us, plain, painful, and undeniable. It's up to us to face it, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to see it. Thank you for joining us at ATP Doctor HQ. Your engagement, likes, shares, comments, keeps this channel thriving and helps us reach more people with life-changing health advice. If you're already a subscriber, we're grateful to have you as part of our community. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love to welcome you. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest content. And if there's a specific health topic you'd like to see covered, let us know. Your voice matters, and your requests could shape our future episodes. Together, let's continue this journey toward better health, one step at a time.